This video is sponsored by Morning Brew, a free daily newsletter that keeps you up to date on what's going on in our simulation in a quick, non-boring way.
Inside, you'll find the breakdown, including key word association with the brand, which I think are great things to keep in mind as you begin working on Matrix 4.
This cannot be another reboot, retread, regurgitate.
Why not? Reboot sell.
Oops. The Matrix Resurrections is a story about a storyteller being forced to return to an old franchise to make a sequel. Okay. That's not only the premise of the movie, but also the premise behind the movie, because according to the producer, Warner's was adamant to continue The Matrix with or without the original filmmaker, which you can definitely find in the subtext as well.
Our beloved parent company, Warner Brothers, has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
They informed me they're gonna do it with or without us.
I thought they couldn't do that.
Oh, they can. And they made it clear they'll kill our contract if we don't cooperate.
And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend not to understand the studio's decision. The world of The Matrix has so much potential both narratively and financially, so it makes sense to return to it. And whether the general execution here was positive or negative, whether Resurrections is a great movie or not, that's up to you. I'm sure there's great arguments for both sides. But when it comes to being a sequel, when it comes to strictly continuing existing material, Resurrections is a predominantly negative example. And I think the best way for us to understand why that is and learn from it is to contrast it against the positive sequel aspects we identified about Wrath of the Titans in a video before. Now, I don't think Wrath of the Titans overall is a better movie than Matrix Resurrections, but it is hands down the better sequel, because it basically copied the most essential sequel qualities from arguably the greatest sequel of all time, Terminator 2. Whereas Resurrections pretty much drops the ball with each and every one of those essential qualities. It recycles core franchise elements without doing anything new with them.
I've been looking for you, Neo.
It doesn't build on or upgrade things from before.
Agent Smith?
And it also cannot even justify its own existence by fixing and concluding oversights of the past.
It's not easy augmenting the genome to photosynthesize by...
So today, that's what we're focusing on. Let's take a closer look at Matrix Resurrections as a continuation of a franchise and identify the core reasons it fumbles at that, so that we'll know what to watch out for with our own Resurrection movies in the future. Here's how to fail at sequel.
What the hell?
The first sequel problem with Resurrections is that although it plays with familiar elements that are essential to the franchise as a sequel should, it doesn't do anything new with them.
I am Morpheus, and I have to find Neo.
Something very familiar about all this.
The best way to explain this is to just look at the story, which is basically a reskinned version of what we've already seen. We begin the movie as we did the original, and on the surface it does look different, because this time we're in an outside perspective. This time Trinity isn't Trinity. This time Morpheus is one of the agents and we have a longer dialogue scene with him. Like, aesthetically, things appear new. But in terms of the broad strokes and dynamics, it's still exactly the same.
Look, we know what happens next.
We still get attacked by officials at this apartment. We still run from agents and do big jumps from rooftops. We still successfully escape the simulation just in time. If we've seen the original, we already know what happens here.
Something very familiar about all this.
After that, we find Neo living his life in the Matrix, which looks different because this time he's rich, but the main point still is that he hates his job and his life around it. And the only glimmer of hope is when he meets Trinity.
You know that road, and I know that's not where you want to be.
This is the best thing I've done in a long time.
We then get to the first office rescue attempt, which looks different because this time Morpheus actually shows up and there's a firefight, but the main point still is that Neo hesitates and gets captured as a result. After which he then gets brought to the safe house where things get explained and he chooses the red pill. Then Neo gets rescued as before, then he immediately faces these preconceived notions about being the one as before.
Not to fanboy out here, but this is kind of a huge moment
for me.
Then he trains with Morpheus as before, and then we go to this human city which might look different from Zion but still plays the same because once again there's no real danger or conflict here because once again the story is primarily about good humans versus evil machines. Even the ultimate goal then becomes about Neo saving someone from the Matrix, which is visually different but dynamically and in terms of the broad story strokes, not so much. And even though it is important to use the core elements that give your franchise its personality, you have to do new things with those elements. Wrath of the Titans begins with a monster attack just like its predecessor because that's what makes these movies what they are, but this time the hero successfully kills the monster and saves his family. This time the story becomes about prevention of evil rather than revenge. We've seen these elements before, but not in this way. The dynamics are different, the broad strokes and outcomes are different.
I know it's not the Kraken I want to kill. How do I get the Hades? I told my father.
You must journey to the underworld and free him.
And it's that type of change in the familiar that Resurrection should have utilized as well. What if this time Neo is happy with his life in the Matrix? How would that change the process of getting him out? What if this time Neo doesn't first discover his powers in a safe training module, but rather in a real situation? What if that's what snaps him out of the Matrix spell? How would that change his way out of the Matrix? What if this time Neo isn't important? What if he's not rescued because of his name, but because he's needed for something else? How would it change his journey if he has to build his reputation rather than rely on needing it? What if this time there's a big human antagonist? If the story this time is about humans and machines versus humans and machines, how would that change things? I'm not saying these are the changes that should have been made. I'm just trying to highlight how they would have forcibly altered things. Because the changes that have been made, they're not enough to alter anything. Neo and Smith joining forces at the end does switch up the relationship dynamics, but it only lasts for one scene.
Bye, have a great time!
The stuff about the Matrix existing as a video game in this world is intriguing, but it ultimately serves no other purpose than to hammer in the same point that Neo hates his life.
Cat videos. The series of videos that we call the cat tricks.
I mean, there's this really interesting idea about making Neo a public enemy.
Maybe there's no foundation to the rumors that you disappeared because you were working with the machines from the beginning.
Which never goes beyond that one line. And it's a shame, because having Neo be hated would have automatically played out very differently than him once again getting special treatment because of who he is.
I've never met a legend before.
Which we've already seen. And if we've already seen it, if we already know exactly how things begin and end and play out, what is the point in seeing them play out again?
He read it on the flight over, and then we met for breakfast the next day. And he said, Jim, I don't know about this. He said, I turned into Bambi here. I don't kill anybody, but I'm the Terminator. Don't worry, you're gonna be seriously badass throughout the film, but we're going for something different here.
That is a really new twist. And I think this is why people celebrated the Terminator.
The second sequel problem with Resurrections is that instead of building on and upgrading things from before, it mostly just offers inferior versions of them. A great first example of this is Agent Smith, who's been reset to be Neo's business partner. Whereas last time Smith had grown powerful enough to devour the entire Matrix, this time he's kinda just one guy who loses to Neo in their very first fight. So he hasn't really been built up as much as he's been ducked down. And also, this time he's played by another actor who no doubt has a lot of talent, but isn't really an upgrade from Hugo Weaving. Like, when you see this new Smith desperately try to be as coldly intimidating as the old Smith, it's just, you know.
That's the trouble, Tom. I've been thinking about us, Tom. You've lost something, Tom. I feel bad about this, Tom.
You're going to help us, Mr. Henderson, whether you want to or not.
Mostly just extremely violent revenge fantasies, but in order for me to pursue mine...
Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing.
In other words, what we have here is a lesser downgraded version of Agent Smith that only decreases our perception of him. As another example, look at Neo, who not only lost most of his powers, but also his agency, because this time he doesn't really even try to solve obstacles on his own as much as he just follows others. He has someone in the office to fight for him. He gets escorted in to see Morpheus, and then then escorted out while others do the fighting. He gets taken into Zion 2.0, where he first lets himself be captured and then lets himself be rescued. Even with his objective of saving Trinity, he still just lets others do the planning and most of the work.
All we have to do is convince someone who does along this edge is a small hexagonal bend modifier, which oxygenates Morpheus will use the system operator to open and need a second human brain to implement. Jaco and I are transferring her consciousness onto the ship.
Okay. I mean, he honestly doesn't do much of anything outside of occasionally raising his hands to block stuff. We never really get that kick-ass Neo from before. And I guess it's the same issue a lot of Luke Skywalker fans had in Episode 8. I'm not here to reopen that conversation because there I personally don't care either way. I'm just trying to convey that even though it may be useful to limit the hero's abilities to make obstacles bigger, to many Neo fans it can be a letdown to know that the bar is up here and now see it all the way down here.
You're not what you used to be.
It's true.
And that's essentially what I'm getting at. You know how The Matrix was about pushing action with very specific sequences, like even Reloaded with the chateau fight featuring all kinds of different weapons, and the freeway chase where they build an actual freeway, and the Burly Brawl where Neo had to take on multiple Smiths at once. Well, this time we kinda just go into a random warehouse to have an ordinary fight, as if there was no time to think of anything specifically special. You know how The Matrix was about pushing fight choreography with long, uninterrupted wide shot takes. Well, this time the choreography is exactly as reliant on editing as any other action movie, as if the alternative wasn't possible anymore. You know how The Matrix was about pushing technology. Well, this time we mostly see the same stuff with slightly better CGI, as if technology had finally caught up with the filmmaker's imagination. Even the few things that are built up from before still can't necessarily be counted as real upgrades.
Bullet time! We need new bullet time.
The main thing here is pushing bullet time to the next level by allowing characters to harness that speed, which is very cool, but then it gets used mainly just as a way for the villain to spout exposition.
Why her? Getting there, and don't worry, she can hear. Acids and bases, you're dangerous when mixed together. My predecessor loved precision.
Push here is one of my handlers. They're everywhere.
It's actually us maximizing your output.
Yeah, the best part, zero resistance. People stay in their...
And it's like, how are you gonna build up to this awesome new level and then never have the hero take part in it? It's just another letdown to see for 2 seconds what it can do and then leave it at that. Like, maybe the old bullet time would have been better because at least Neo could be part of it.
I own that mistake. Shouldn't have pressed. Women used to be so easy to control. You know there's no way I can let you two go free. Cannot.
In Clash of the Titans, we fought weapons of gods.
You will be my weapon.
Whereas in a sequel, we matured into fighting actual gods.
Which one of you pranked him?
That's a major step further from before. And when you compare that to Resurrection steps of, oh, this time Morpheus is hip and a robot, this time we can go through mirrors instead of phones, this time agents have been replaced by swarms of NPCs, which we already kinda got with Smith clones, I don't know.
Such a pain cloning agents over a copper top. Far more effective just to saturate a population.
Maybe some of it is an upgrade, but it's not enough to matter, because for the most part, this movie is a lesser, inferior version of its predecessors, which isn't something audiences want their sequels to be. The third sequel problem with Resurrections is that it doesn't justify its own existence by fixing past problems and concluding incomplete narrative threads. A great example of past problems is the sequence where we go to Zion 2.0, which is by far the most boring part of the movie, just like it was in Reloaded. Because once again, there's no real danger or obstacles or conflict here, since humanity is good as before and Neo is the one as before.
Crazy. You're real.
We're not doing anything other than wasting time talking about history lessons and explaining how the humans are now able to grow vegetables.
A strawberry?
Using digital code from the Matrix, we retro-convert it into DNA sequences.
And they grow here.
It's not easy augmenting the genome to photosynthesize.
And the worst thing about it is that this was literally the biggest problem people had with Reloaded. Nobody wanted to leave the Matrix to go hang out in a cave. So how can you have this moment about researching audience feedback
Packet in front of you has our focus group research.
and then not listen to the single biggest piece of audience feedback? Like, nobody wants to pause the journey to go get technical details about growing strawberries. Nobody gives a shit today just like they didn't 20 years ago. But the filmmakers just don't care enough to even try to make it better. They'll just repeat past mistakes because whatever.
When word first came that it actually might be you.
Same thing with all the philosophy stuff, which once again shows that the Matrix filmmakers are way too smart for their own good. Instead of doing something with the new bullet time, they just use it as a way for the villain to go on and on about political stuff you'll find on an average Twitter account.
Here's the thing about feelings, your fiction is so much easier to control than feelings.
Instead of doing something with the old villains, they just bring them back for one scene to rant about Facebook being bad.
You gave us Facebook to suck this beep 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 beep.
Not only are these forceful big brain views of the world a decade late, sometimes they don't even make any sense, as is the case with the movie criticism. Like, how are you chastising the movie business for making only terrible sequels while at the same time making a sequel that improves on none of those things? Like, you're literally copy-pasting your earlier work in a much worse way. The original Matrix was really smart and the sequel should be too, but just tone it down a bit. Don't force your own intelligence to the point where it overshadows the story and characters.
You gave us space to suck and couch flicks. Oh, no, 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 no.
Then there's other individual things like the new machine villain being essentially a hipster version of the old machine villain, because why bother building a less boring one?
And among 9.9% of your race, that is the definition of reality.
And I'm sure there's even more issues from Revolutions here too, but I just couldn't be bothered to rewatch it, so hopefully you get the point. And if you don't, watch how Wrath deliberately fixes the biggest weaknesses of its predecessor. How the two-dimensional gods are given layers. How the ending monster doesn't come out of nowhere, but is instead built up from the beginning. If there had been a strawberry scene in the first movie, I guarantee you it wouldn't have been in the sequel.
And now I am forced to rise because we are all friends.
The other side of this is that Resurrections doesn't advance any unconcluded narrative threads. The whole thing with setting Agent Smith free from the Matrix, for example, we already did that. We set him free, we fought him, we destroyed him, that's it, it was done. So why are we undoing that thread to do it again?
After all, you are the one who set me free. Again.
Or take the main plot of saving Neo and Trinity to save the Matrix. It serves no purpose. It's never explained why Neo needs to be rescued or what is the terrible issue with this new simulation that must be amended. At the end, we hear this general talk of how the new Matrix needs to be changed for the better.
We're on our way to remake your world.
Change a few things.
I don't like the paint the sky with rainbows idea.
Just remind people what a free mind can do.
And then the movie just ends without ever explaining what that change is. Like, the only issues you've brought up so far are Facebook culture and sequels, so is that the big new evil Neo and Trinity came back to wipe away? Like, fine, I guess, but it kinda seems like you're undoing their achievements in the previous movies just so that you can do the same thing all over again.
What about the others? The ones that want out?
Obviously, they will be freed.
Fight! Turns out in my Matrix, the worse we treat you, the more we manipulate you, the more energy you produce.
Wrath of the Titans justified its existence by, for example, delving deeper into the incomplete premise that the gods are dying. That's a loose narrative thread from the predecessor that the sequel concludes.
We have starved them of our prayers.
Whereas if Resurrections never happened, the Matrix universe would still be in the exact same place it was after Revolutions. Nothing would be different, because we're not advancing things as much as we're just yanking them back for a redo.
The Matrix is the same or worse, and I'm back where I started. It feels like everything we did, none of it mattered.
And that might be the biggest sequel crime of them all. If you can't find any loose narrative threads to justify your sequel's existence, if the story and world of the franchise in your mind is already fully complete with nothing more left to do, then maybe that's how it is. Maybe you should just resurrect your hesitation and consider the possibility that you're not the right person to make that sequel, or that it shouldn't be made at all. But speaking of Facebook and Twitter and how you waste your mornings checking them, how about you fix your Matrix and instead spend those precious morning minutes to catch up on the most essential events going on in our simulation? Well, for that I recommend Morning Brew, a fully free daily newsletter that condenses the main highlights from business to tech to finance to anything else and gives them to you in a quick, non-insufferable way. If you're into the stock market or if you're a crypto billionaire, here's an easy way to keep an eye on that stuff. Or if you're into the movie business like me, you would have found out that Warner's is in trouble for putting this new Matrix on HBO Max, which will be interesting to see play out. You don't have to go look for the news, you'll get the most essential news given to you in a few minutes. It's like moving in bullet time compared to social and traditional media. So if you want to easily stay in the know, there's no reason not to try Morning Brew out. It's fully free, takes less than 15 seconds to sign up, so just click the link below to do so. Helps you and the channel, thanks.